everyone, I'm Anne Riddell and welcome to Arts in the City. This month we're taking a look at some of our favorite stories from this season, stories that pay homage to our city's past, from the American Revolution to Yiddish Theater. First up, when gorgeous stained glass windows have been damaged, the artists who can step up to help are few and far between. Donna Hanover heads to the Gill Studio to see how stained glass becomes glorious again.
When a beautiful stained glass window has been damaged by people or time, it goes to conservators who can bring these artworks back to their original glory. At the Gill Studio, owner Zach Green says one of the first steps is to make a wax rubbing like Glazier Joan Then is doing here.
This piece is probably 120 or 30 years old, and it's got to be taken apart. This document will show the size of the lead and the position of each lead so that when we take the window apart, we know exactly how to put it back together.
They recently completed work on a huge window at the Church of the Heavenly Rest on 5th Avenue.
The west window overlooks Central Park. It's about 50 feet tall. It was built by the Whitefriars Studio from London in the 1920s. So the window was beginning to deflect and bulge to the interior and the exterior under its own weight.
The 4 vertical lancets and the tracery section above them were removed in about 150 separate panels and brought to the Gill Studio in Union City, New Jersey. The pieces of broken glass were repaired or replaced, and the panels were partially re-leaded. It took about 6 months. Zach explained there are different ways stained glass is held together.
The original medieval method of assembling a stained glass window would be to use strips of lead that hold the pieces of glass together. So the lead would be a piece like this that has a channel on each side, and a piece of glass fits into either side.
A more modern method is with copper foil.
We'll wrap each piece of glass with some copper around the perimeter, and when we set those 2 pieces of glass next to each other, we'll solder the copper edge of each piece of glass to the next one. It's sort of known as the Tiffany method, and they developed that for putting stained glass lamps together.
This is a window that Zach rescued from being demolished. It's a wonderful example of a technique that was developed in America called drapery glass. It's curved and 3-dimensional, so it duplicates the effect of light falling on real fabric.
A valued artist at the Gill Studio, Michael Davis, explains that drapery glass is very heavy, however, putting stress on the lead in the windows. This one from St. Paul and St. Andrew Church on West 86th Street in Manhattan is beautiful now, but it came to the Gill Studio badly damaged.
It was falling apart. It was falling apart. And this part of the window literally came to us in a shoebox.
In most stained glass windows, the faces and hands have actually been painted on, so painting is part of the conservation work.
This piece is in pretty good shape. Mostly it's going to be cleaned. This piece, on the other hand, has been horribly smashed. So all of these shards have been collected. They'll be glued back together, and then the missing painted elements will be repainted.
Zach got into stained glass as an apprentice with a family friend. His parents are his inspiration, and he has one of his mom's drawings showing his sister Jessie up on the wall.
My mother has been an artist all her life, and I wish I had a fraction of her talent. And my father is a skilled builder, and I sort of think of stained glass as the intersection of art and construction.
One of the studio's famed projects before Zach's time was conservation of the windows in the museum at Eldridge Street, a beloved synagogue that had fallen into disrepair. They also fabricated the very modern East Rose window for it, designed by artist Kiki Smith and architect Deborah Gans. It was made using a technique where the art glass is layered with silicone holding it together like glue.
This is actually one of the mock-ups from the Eldridge Street Synagogue Museum. These stars have been etched from the glass with hydrofluoric acid and then painted with glass paint to be this amber color. And then some of the stars were actually gold leaf.
Zach sometimes creates stained glass art of his own, and the studio also helps other artists who want to make new pieces. Meanwhile, they mostly do conservation of classic stained glass windows. They've just completed work, for example, on a window at Calvary Presbyterian Church in Staten Island. There are many fewer stained glass studios than there used to be. But luckily, some creative people are still drawn to this exquisite art.
I love the power of colored light. There's something really striking and exhilarating when that light is able to tell a story.
I'm Donna Hanover for Arts in the City.
Nowadays, when you want a bottle of sparkling water or seltzer, you just head to the store and buy a plastic bottle. But 100 years ago, seltzer came in hand-blown glass bottles and was only available for delivery by the case. Our Andrew Falzone popped into New York City's last remaining seltzer bottler.
Every time Alex Gomberg opens the doors to Brooklyn Seltzer Boys in Cypress Hills, Brooklyn, he's not only continuing the third generation of a family business, he's preserving a New York City tradition. You see, once upon a time, seltzer factories like his were common in the city, but just like visits from the milkman, most seltzer deliveries faded away.
So our family got started into the business, I would believe, in the late 40s, early 50s. My great-grandfather started Gomberg Seltzer Works, which was our family company, in 1953. So seltzer men would have their own trucks, and they would come to our Gomberg Seltzer Works and have their bottles filled.
Now Brooklyn Seltzer Boys is the last seltzer filler in New York State, but the seltzer business here in Brooklyn is quite bubbly. Alex says Brooklyn Seltzer Boys has a roster of about 600 plus residential customers, some bars and restaurants, and a substantial wait list.
So we're really going as far as we can go with our own trucks. But there's just a point where it gets a little bit too far.
That's because Brooklyn Seltzer is a two-way sale. Brooklyn Seltzer Boys comes in a reusable pressurized glass bottle. After each use, they're collected, washed out, and sent back out. Hand-blown in Czechoslovakia, some of them are over 100 years old, each bottle an antique vessel carrying a vintage product.
A lot of the bottles have imprints with the old logos of etchings of old Seltzermen. Also with the name of the seltzer company on the top of on the head. You get a case delivered, there's 10 bottles in a case. You're picking up history every single time.
While the bottle heads that shoot the seltzer are equally old, they're far more complicated to maintain.
There's a lot of different springs and washers inside. The head's about 15 different pieces to the bottle. So it's not something that can easily be made in a mold. There's a lot of working parts to it.
And Alex's business has some other working parts as well. When the Seltzer Factory's delivery bays empty out, it reveals the Brooklyn Seltzer Museum, which is a collaboration between the Gomberg family and Barry Joseph, a part-time faculty member at NYU and the author of Seltzertopia, a 300-page love letter to its namesake. On display are some of the original machines that powered Gomberg Seltzer Works back in the 50s, and finally a walk on the factory floor, which takes visitors through the 4-stage process of making seltzer. First, the water is triple filtered through sand, charcoal, and paper to remove any impurities and unwanted taste. The water then gets chilled between 32 and 42 degrees, which makes the next step, which is carbonation, more efficient.
We then take it from the carbonator and bring it into our seltzer machine, and then these bottles, okay, will go one by one into the machine, and one time around the bottle's filled.
That's when it's time for pickup and delivery, and during our visit, we were lucky enough to bump into a true seltzer legend. In fact, Walter Backerman may be the world's most famous seltzer man. Not only is he memorialized in the Brooklyn Seltzer Museum, but he's told his story to the New York Times, NPR, and even Japan's NHK TV. For him, seltzer has literally been a lifelong career.
And as my father rang doorbells, looking for new customers, my mother pushed me in the baby buggy. And that's my first day on the route. Wow. And that's over 70 years ago.
And it's safe to say that some of those same bottles that you were pushing around that day are right here.
Well, I wasn't pushing them then, but now I am. Now I am. So look at it. Look at these beautiful bottles. Yeah. Beautiful. They're works of art.
First, we're gonna take fox.
Before we parted ways, Alex offered to share the technique and nuance of making perhaps the best sweet treat one can with seltzer, a proper Brooklyn egg cream. It starts with classic you-bet syrup in your favorite flavor, but chocolate is tradition, some ice-cold milk, and, of course, Brooklyn seltzer. But it's not as simple as mix and stir.
So the trick is you want to take a spoon, like a long spoon, and you want to deflect the seltzer off of the spoon. And what you want to do is you want to create this nice white foamy frothy head on top.
Okay.
Okay, we're not going to mix until the seltzer is in there. So now we're going to mix it, and the best egg cream is going to be darkest on the bottom and lightest on the top.
Then just add a candy-striped straw for nostalgia and sip it. I'm Andrew Falzone for Arts in the City.
That is good.
It's good, right?
That is amazing.
Flowers in the family. We visited a fourth-generation business in the garment district that's been making fabric flowers for decades, bringing old-world craftsmanship to modern fashion, one blossom at a time. Blooms even Mother Nature might admire. M&S Schmalberg on West 36th Street has been making fabric flowers by hand since 1916, supplying artificial blossoms for everyone from designers and brides to A-list celebrities.
We've done flowers for Lizzo, Paris Hilton, Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, Beyonce, Anne Hathaway, Sarah Jessica Parker.
Adam Brand is a fourth-generation owner here, a flower guy in his own right, determined to keep this custom accessory craft alive. But he explains that's no small task in a fast fashion world.
Today, I know one feather guy that still exists, and we're the last legitimate factory in New York that makes fabric flowers. There's a lot of hard work that went into my family and working Saturdays and staying late, not getting paid. There were some very, very, very concerning times where I legitimately would have told you, I don't know if we'll still be here in a couple of years. And every time it got really grim, you get an order from one of our clients. And that's kind of where there's a special magic to this place.
A place and a family rooted in survival.
My grandpa was incredible. He is a Holocaust survivor. He was born in Poland. He was there when the war broke out. He lost his mother, his father, 2 brothers, a sister. They were all killed by the Nazis. I've heard countless stories about terrible stuff, and I've also heard stories just about, again, how wonderful he was. He was a survivor, through and through.
And did he love this business?
Love. He loved this business.
And the business of making fabric flowers is in some ways much like it was 100 years ago.
The whole process has been around over a century, and a lot of our dyes and molds have been around that long as well. These things are old, these things are heavy.
You're not joking.
This whole entity is a combination of some really amazing vintage tools, molds that are irreplaceable, and staff members that are incredibly talented and also irreplaceable. So here is a silk satin faced organza.
It all begins with a piece of fabric that's starched and spun, then stretched on frames to dry and prevent wrinkling. Layered fabric is then cut using these machines, which turn out fabric petals that ultimately go from flat to fabulous.
I'm taking this dahlia petal and I'm pressing it in this daisy veiner.
Okay.
And we'll see what happens.
Okay.
So because it's silk, I can do a few at a time. So these molds are very hot.
Yes.
So you have the heat, you have the pressure.
Wow,
Now you
look
have
at that.
pressed panel. You can feel it, it's warm.
That's amazing. The final stop, shapes are combined with painstaking care to create individual flowers.
So the roses have 2 shapes. There's one shape that's used to create this bud in the center.
Yeah.
And then a larger shape in the back to create the finished rose.
Will Adam's children grow into the family business? Maybe, he says, but only if they want to and the company is still there. For now, his hope is to simply remain firmly planted.
My hope is to continue this craft. I love that we are we make something that makes people happy. Real flowers as they exist in nature is one of the most wonderful things that are created in our world. And the fact that we're able to mimic those and just create that beauty is amazing.
Yiddish theater was once a vital form of entertainment for Jews across the world and here in New York, where 2nd Avenue downtown was compared to Broadway. Our Neil Rosen visited one of the city's last remaining Yiddish theater companies.
Singen Bellach jetzt ein Lied, und Zaza, bleibt das Lied sehr gut, und Zaza, bleibt das Lied weggefällt.
In another era, now long gone, the Yiddish Theater District thrived on New York's Lower East Side. At its height, from the late 1800s through the 1930s, its attendance rivaled that of Broadway. There were dozens of theaters along 2nd Avenue that catered to the newly arrived Jewish population, who came to New York predominantly from Eastern Europe. They settled in the area, and even though they worked long hours for extremely low wages, they saved their pennies to go to a show, as they longed for a few hours of escapist entertainment in their native language, namely Yiddish. Even though all those Yiddish theaters don't exist anymore that used to flourish on 2nd Avenue in the 1920s, the National Yiddish Theater Folksbiene has found a permanent home at the Jewish Museum of American Heritage downtown in Manhattan.
The Folksbiene was founded in 1915 as a group of non-professional workers who had a love for theater. Seamstresses, haberdashers, people who just wanted to play Yiddish theater. You have to remember there were hundreds of thousands of Jewish immigrants that came in that period, from the late 1890s to the early 1910s, and their lingua franca, their language was Yiddish, and they flocked to the Yiddish theater, even more than the synagogue. The Yiddish theater was a place where people would come together and see each other, and they would see their lives depicted on the stage.
Why more than the synagogue?
Because they could have fun there, you know. When Jews left the Lower East Side and they started to assimilate into American life, Yiddish stopped being the spoken language of Jews. English was mostly spoken. Yiddish became the secret language. And with that, the Yiddish theater started to dwindle and not really have an audience. We believe that Yiddish theater is a lens into a world that does not exist and people can't see it in any other way. They can open up an encyclopedia on a website and they can look at pictures. They can listen to recordings. But we offer a live presentation of what Jewish life was and how it sounded.
A fiddler Affendach.
Of all of Folksbiene's recent productions, their most successful was Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish, along with English subtitles projected on each side of the stage.
Yeah, we had a tremendous success with Fiddler. You know, it was always my dream to be able to produce Fiddler in Yiddish on a level that New Yorkers and the world could appreciate it.
This is 2nd Avenue in the East Village, and even though all those Yiddish theaters are now long gone, if you know where to look, remnants of those structures still survive today. One of the grand theaters of the era was the Yiddish Arts Theater on 12th Street and 2nd Avenue. Today, it exists as a multiplex movie theater. Built in 1926, the cornerstone is still there in English and Hebrew lettering, and if you walk around the place, you can still see remnants of its elaborate decor. Built in 1904, the Orpheum Theater is still there, where way back when, it hosted many of the Yiddish stars of the day. The building behind me with all the scaffolding on it may not look like much now, but once upon a time, it was the iconic rock venue, the Fillmore East. But before that, you guessed it, it was built as a Yiddish theater. The 2nd Avenue Deli is no longer in its original location on 10th Street. It's now a bank. But what does remain on the sidewalk in front of the place is a Hollywood-style Walk of Fame with the names of the Yiddish stars who graced the many stages in the neighborhood 100 years ago. And for a taste of what the experience of seeing Yiddish theater back then was like, the National Yiddish Theater Folksbiene has made it come alive once again.
The National Yiddish Theater is dedicated to bringing Jewish life onto the stage and educate audiences and in entertaining fashion to the riches of this 1,000-year-old Yiddish culture.
For more information about the National Yiddish Theater Folksbiene, including their schedule of productions, the kids programs that they offer, and even Yiddish classes, visit their website at nytf.org. For Arts in the City, I'm Neil Rosen.
When you think of the Revolutionary War, cities like Boston and Philadelphia immediately come to mind, but our hometown also played an important role in the American Revolution. Mike Gilliam went downtown for a tour of New York's forgotten revolutionary history.
It's called the NYC Revolutionary Trail Tour, and it's designed to bring a bit of rich New York City history to tourists and people living in the city.
The story of New York's unexpected lurch into the revolution begins here, at the Battery, where the cannon outside Fort George once stood guard over New York City's harbor. Until the mid-1700s, New York was just a fledgling outpost in the British Empire.
Peter Aigner is the director of the Gotham Center for New York City History at the CUNY Graduate Center and heads up the project. The tour, which is narrated and can be accessed on a smartphone, lasts 90 minutes as participants make their way around Lower Manhattan. But part of the challenge is showing the city's history when so many of the landmarks no longer exist.
So part of the challenge that we have in New York is where the old city was are now a bunch of giant skyscrapers. Right. It's hard when you're coming here as a tourist or as a resident to sort of hear about this history and sort of imagine the way things are and sort of really understand the landscape. So with our project, what you would eventually be able to do is to tap on your phone and actually see the historic landscape of the city, right? And to interact with some of the characters, right? So Alexander Hamilton might be walking by, or Isaac Sears, or any of the sort of characters that we profile.
Over the years, New York has kind of let Boston and Philadelphia lead when it comes to Revolutionary War history. And many think that all of the action was in those two areas. But Aigner says nothing could be further from the truth. The problem here is many of the landmarks were destroyed by fires and demolition. The history is here, you just need to know where to look.
Okay, so City Hall Park, you got a lot of stuff here that we can talk about, right?
There's so much going on here. This is one of the major sites of rebellion in the period before the war, before the revolution, right? What we're walking up to here is the Liberty Pole, right? This commemorates 5 poles that actually went up during this period when the city is just beset with constant protest and riots.
The poles were a symbol of protest against British rule.
If you're not thinking about it, it's very easy to miss a lot of the historical sites around New York City. Take, for instance, this one right here. This is marking the British soldiers' barracks just outside of City Hall Park. When we talk about the history of New York City, it's very easy to glorify all of this and say this is great. This is not so great for African Americans, right?
No. What is interesting about this period for African Americans is that we see them lining up on both sides, right? So there are actually upwards of, I think, 8,000 people who joined the rebellion, and they served far longer actually than white Americans in the rebellion, in the Continental Force, right? So actually, they're a huge, huge part of that story, of the founding of the nation, right? And they play key roles.
So another one of the locations here is Federal Hall, okay, right here off Wall Street. What is the significance of it?
So this would have been the capital for the city and the colony during the colonial period, right? Okay. And then afterwards, it's reborn when New York becomes the first U.S. capital. So this is where the Congress meets, right? This building gets redesigned. Lafayette comes in and gives us this brand new sort of beautiful building that you see. This is where Washington is sworn in as the first U.S. president.
Trinity Church is also featured on the tour and includes the grave of Alexander Hamilton. You can sample the current app by logging on to the NYC Revolutionary Trail Tour at home or while taking the tour. I'm Mike Gilliam for Arts in the City.
Brooklyn artist Danny Cortez remembers growing up in the hip-hop and graffiti-infused streets of the 1980s. His minutely crafted miniature models commemorating that era have earned him international acclaim. Our Barry Mitchell paid a visit.
Hey, I saw Danny Cortez the other day. Small world, Can things go back to the way that they were before? Without you, I'm hurting more. I don't wanna play the games in a certain you're the one for me, the one for me.
I'm a miniature artist based out of Brooklyn, Bushwick. I just try to document my era, which is the 80s, 90s. I could go far as back as Mr. Rogers, but I knew that I don't come from that world. Okay. I was like more urban, so let me document my surrounding.
This is an icebox under glass. Why is it under glass?
Because this is the first piece I ever did that started this whole obsession of miniatures. It just, I didn't know what materials to use. I used some cheap dollar store foam core, some shish kebab skewer sticks there.
This Chinese restaurant is an actual place.
It's an actual place.
And it was bought for quite a lot of money by a famous rapper.
Yes.
Tell us how much.
Okay.
Come on. $10? 10K? $10,000. And how's this for prestige? Sotheby's auctioned Danny's miniature newsstand as part of its Art and Influence of Hip-Hop collection. And then there's that second auction of Danny's newest, most ambitious project yet.
It's called The Block. This is how New York City looked like when the genre hip-hop was born. It tells stories, too. Do you see, like, they getting mugged here? You have a little mailbox. Might be a squatter in there. Abandoned cars, tons of rubble.
How long did that take?
This bad boy took 3 months because it has the underground station, too.
All his life, Danny held a series of unfulfilling jobs. Then the pandemic hit.
These miniatures definitely saved my life because I was going through so much at that time. It was very dark during the pandemic, very dark. So going through a divorce, going through so much at the time, financial situations, and then all of a sudden, we're in a lockdown now. Having these tools around, thank God I had these tools laying around, and it just sparked this idea, okay, now I can work on art. Let's try it. This thing that I wanted to try. Every time I worked on a piece, all those problems disappeared.
For Danny, it's all about nostalgia.
So this is a street pole. It represents like a personal piece for anyone. Who doesn't want a street pole sitting in their living room to represent where they came from?
I'm from Brooklyn, and I took music lessons on Avenue D.
Look at that. You see? So this brought you memories just by looking at it. I did my job.
I just find it hysterical that these things that we pass by on the street and ignore, you find meaning and purpose in them.
I find it so beautiful.
Beautiful?
Beautiful. It's an eyesore to many people, but it tells a story from the rust, from the stickers to the graffiti. It's documenting a time of New York City.
I see.
It's a time, a period.
It's a time capsule.
Right.
So would I be incorrect to say a beat-up, rusty, defaced mailbox is your Mona Lisa?
Absolutely. You won't be wrong. You nailed it. You nailed it. That's right.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so
Danny
much.
Cortez, thank you.
Thank you.
And you're watching Arts in the City.
That is our show for today. Thanks so much for joining us. A quick reminder to check us out on social media. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Anne Riddell. We'll see you next time on the new season of Arts in the City.